Thank you. It's wonderful to be here in Amsterdam. This city and its leaders have been pioneers of HIV treatment and prevention, reaching out directly to groups who have faced discrimination in other countries and seeking out bold solutions. As early as 1984, Amsterdam became the first city in the world to implement a needle and syringe program. One of the most effective and still underutilized ways to reduce the spread of HIV. And this city's leaders have continued to fight for marginalized populations, migrants and refugees, sex workers, people who inject drugs, women and girls, and the LGBTQ community. It's no surprise given the values Dutch people are known for. Values like inclusion, multiculturalism, and freedom of expression. You can feel it in the air here. Amsterdam is a beacon of openness and acceptance in a world that more and more feels consumed by isolationism and judgment. So I can't imagine a more fitting place for us to gather to continue this fight. And yet, as I stand here in this beautiful city, in this proud country, I have to acknowledge another piece of Dutch history, one that's very personal to me. Along with being an actor, an activist, and a mother, I am also an Afrikaner. Ja, ek is 'n Afrikaner en is lekker om 'n taal te praat wat in 'n land waarvan julle my kan verstaan, 'n bietjie, nee. Ek hoop so. Okay. My family are descendants of Dutch people who settled in South Africa during the colonial period, and like most colonial powers at the time, many Dutch who arrived on South African shores nearly 400 years ago held a worldview that was deeply, unequivocally wrong. They believed the lie of white supremacy. They didn't see local people they met as their equals. They didn't even recognize them as full human beings. They saw them as a resource to exploit or a problem to eradicate. And they organized their society around those prejudices. Some 400 years later, South Africa is still struggling to fully dismantle those racist systems founded on those beliefs. So, what does this have to do with the modern AIDS epidemic? The hallmarks of colonialism, dehumanization, and discrimination and stereotypes and stigma are also the hallmarks of the HIV epidemic. These attitudes have fueled the spread of HIV from the start and continue to cover abuse, neglect, and injustice. It's not all bad news. We have come a long way as a global community from that moral panic that defined the early stages of this epidemic. Most of us now know and understand that HIV is not just about sex or sexuality. It is not, as the American Reverend Jerry Falway once suggested, God's punishment on promiscuity. We know it is linked to the second-class status of women and girls worldwide. We know it preys on people who lack the resources or the ability to protect themselves, like young people, and young girls in particular. We know it targets communities that our society has exploited, has shamed, has discarded. Communities like sex workers, people who inject drugs, and our trans community, and men who have sex with men. And we all understand this. So what are we doing about it? As hearts and minds have changed, have our organizations and approaches followed? I would argue they haven't. I mean, how many of us have taken steps to challenge our own stereotypes and confront unconscious bias in our own search for effective solutions? How many of us can truly say that our strategies are driven by the most affected and developed from the grassroots up rather than from the top down? How many of us are investing our time and resources and engaging our greatest allies and our most valuable resources, the young people and the local leaders who are essential to stopping the spread of HIV in their communities? And I understand that my comments might not sit well with everybody here today. Me, being a privileged descendant of European colonizers, a white South African, standing up here calling for us to be more inclusive. But those of us who have been beneficiaries of unjust systems cannot change where we come from, nor can we change the past. But what we can do is use our positions and platforms to create environments and opportunities where others can succeed. Last week I was in South Africa with my Africa Outreach project, where we visited some of our incredible program partners. We were in the Eastern Cape, an area that's incredibly rural, and we met some amazing young activists who were leading dialogues with community elders and religious leaders and parents around topics like gender, like transgender and LGBTQ rights, access to youth-friendly sexual and reproductive health services, and the inexcusable high rate of gender-based violence and rape. And I couldn't stop thinking, if these youth who have so few resources and have so many dangerous beliefs working against them can talk about the toughest social issues with such courage and conviction, what is our excuse not to do the same? Why can't we all be that brave? I am so inspired by these young people. And today I am humbly acting as their messenger, sharing their passion and amplifying their voices. But really, they are the leaders that should be up here on this stage speaking. So, as we gather in this enlightened city, in the 37th year of the AIDS epidemic, as we confront a rising tide of nationalism, nativism, and dehumanizing rhetoric all around the world, I hope we are inspired by our hosts here in Amsterdam. I hope we use our positions, our privilege, and our influence to fight injustice. I hope we learn from the lessons of our history and use them to change the course of our future. Because this movement that we're all called to be a part of is even bigger than the 30-plus year fight to end AIDS. It is inextricably linked to the centuries-long fight for equality, dignity, and human rights. And the only way to win this fight is by shifting power, by investing directly in the people who've been shut out, oppressed, and pushed out to the margins, by elevating local voices, supporting community leadership, especially our young people, by spreading opportunity, access, and the tools to live healthy lives, not through one-size-fits-all solutions, but engaging one person and one community at a time, by always keeping the human element of the heart and at the heart of all of our work. Because numbers and outcomes are very important, but not as important as treating people as people. I began today talking about my ancestry. I began talking about my ancestry today, but I'm really here because of what I've witnessed during my own lifetime. I saw my home, South Africa, brought to its knees by the AIDS epidemic. I grew up during apartheid. I watched my country tear itself apart with prejudice, and then I watched it transform itself with Ubuntu. Ubuntu, the recognition of our common humanity, the belief that we are all bound to one another, all of us. It's a powerful force, more powerful than anything that can divide us. And I feel it in this room. I feel it here in Amsterdam. I'm so grateful to be here together with all of you, still fighting. Thank you for your dedication and for your extraordinary life-saving work. Thank you.
To give